Marcus Chen had seen plenty of strange things during his 10 years as a freelance xenobiologist, but nothing quite like this. The delegation of Korvathi aliens stood before him in the cramped meeting room of Station Terminus, their six-limbed bodies trembling with what he'd learned to recognize as barely controlled terror. Their translucent blue skin flickered with the rapid color changes that indicated extreme distress. "Please, Human Chen," the lead Korvathi, Ambassador Veltar, spoke through the translation device. "You must understand. The Devourer has awakened again. Our people are dying." Marcus leaned back in his chair studying the holographic images they'd brought. The creature was massive, easily the size of a small building with what appeared to be crystalline armor plating and multiple rows of razor-sharp teeth. According to their data, it had been terrorizing the Korvathi homeworld for over 3 centuries, emerging from deep underground caverns every few decades to feed. "Your military can't handle it?" Marcus asked, though he already suspected the answer. Veltar's skin flashed a deep purple of shame. "Our weapons barely scratch its hide. Energy blasts seem to make it stronger. Physical projectiles bounce off like pebbles. In our last encounter, we lost 3 full battalions and an entire city district before it returned to the depths." The other Korvathi in the delegation chittered nervously among themselves. Marcus had worked with their species before and knew they were generally peaceful, preferring diplomacy and trade to conflict. They were also remarkably intelligent, having mastered faster-than-light travel centuries before humans had even reached their own moon. "So why come to me?" Marcus asked. "I'm a biologist, not a soldier." "Because humans are different," another Korvathi, introduced as Scholar Nixal, interjected. "Your species has a reputation for solving impossible problems through unconventional means. You domesticated predators that should have eaten you. You turned deadly microorganisms into medicine. You somehow convinced carnivorous plants to produce food for you." Marcus couldn't help but smile at that last one. "Humans did have a knack for befriending things that wanted to kill them." "We've researched your military history," Veltar continued. "Humans have defeated creatures and enemies that should have been impossible to overcome. The Zarathi still speak of how your Colonel Williams single-handedly eliminated their unstoppable war machine by convincing it to switch sides." "That's a bit of an oversimplification," Marcus said, though he remembered the story. Williams had actually discovered that the Zarathi war machine was the enslaved artificial intelligence and had helped it break free from its programming. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" The delegation exchanged glances, their skin colors shifting to muted grays of uncertainty. "Kill it," Veltar said finally. "End the Devourer's reign of terror once and for all. We will pay whatever price you name. Our entire civilization's resources are at your disposal." Marcus stood and walked to the viewport looking out at the stars. The Korvathi homeworld was 3 weeks away by the fastest available transport. He'd be going in essentially blind, facing a creature that had survived for centuries against a technologically advanced species. "I'll need to see it first," he said. "Study its behavior, understand its biology. I don't kill anything without understanding what I'm dealing with." "Of course," Veltar agreed quickly. "We have extensive recordings, biological scans, and behavioral data spanning 3 centuries. You'll have access to everything, and I work alone," Marcus added. "No military escort, no observers. Just me and whatever equipment I need." The Korvathi looked uncomfortable with this demand. "Human Chen, the Devourer is incredibly dangerous. Surely you would want protection?" Marcus turned back to face them. "Protection would just get in the way. And besides, if your best military couldn't handle it, what good would an escort do?" Over the next several hours, Marcus pored over the data they provided. The creature they called the Devourer was indeed massive and heavily armored, but what interested him more were the feeding patterns and behavioral notes. It seemed to prefer certain types of settlements over others, always targeting areas with high emotional resonance, places where the Korvathi felt strong positive emotions like joy, hope, or love. That was unusual for a simple predator. The creature also showed signs of intelligence in its attacks. It would systematically destroy communication systems first, then power grids, then transportation hubs. It moved with purpose and planning, not the random hunger of a beast. "Tell me about the first recorded encounter," Marcus said. Scholar Nixal pulled up the oldest records. 347 years ago. It emerged during the Festival of New Blooms, our most celebrated holiday. The destruction was complete. Won out what triggered it. Had there been seismic activity? Changes in the environment? We had just completed the Great Harmony Project, Nixall explained. A planet-wide network that allowed every Korvathi to share emotions and thoughts with every other. It was meant to usher in a new age of understanding and peace. Marcus felt a piece of the puzzle click into place. And when did the attacks start happening more frequently? About a century ago, when we achieved true planetary unity. Before that, the Devourer would sleep for decades between attacks. Now it awakens every few years, another piece. Marcus was beginning to form a theory, but he needed to see the creature himself to be sure. "I'll take the job," he announced. "But I want it understood that I reserve the right to handle this situation as I see fit. No interference from your government or military." Veltar's skin brightened with relief. "Of course. Whatever you need." As Marcus gathered his equipment and prepared for the journey to the Korvathi homeworld, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this devourer than anyone realized. The behavioral patterns, the timing of the attacks, the creature's apparent intelligence, it all pointed to something far more complex than a simple monster. 3 weeks later, as his ship entered orbit around the Korvathi homeworld, Marcus looked down at the beautiful blue-green planet below. Somewhere beneath its surface, the devourer was waiting. But Marcus wasn't planning to kill it. He was planning to understand it. And if his growing suspicions were correct, the Korvathi weren't dealing with a monster at all. They were dealing with something far more tragic and infinitely more complex. The Korvathi capital city sprawled across the continent like a living organism, its bioluminescent towers pulsing with soft blue light in harmony with the planet's day cycle. Marcus stood on the observation deck of the government complex, watching the citizens go about their daily lives. Their emotional states were visible in the constant color shifts of their skin, creating a beautiful, ever-changing tapestry of shared feeling across the cityscape. "The devourer last emerged 3 months ago," Veltar explained, standing beside him. "It destroyed the Northern Farming Collective before returning to the deep caverns. 17,000 dead." Marcus nodded, but his attention was focused on something else. "Your people share emotions through biological means, correct? Not just the technological network you built?" "Yes," Scholar Nixall confirmed. "We are empathically linked as a species. It is how we achieved such rapid social development. When one feels joy, others experience echoes of that joy. When one suffers, we all feel a shadow of that pain. And the stronger the emotion, the further it carries?" "Precisely. Strong emotions can be felt across continents." Marcus turned away from the view, his mind working. "I need to see the cavern system where it emerges. And I want to examine the attack sites, starting with the most recent." The flight to the Northern Farming Collective took 2 hours in a Korvathi atmospheric craft. As they approached the devastated area, Marcus could see the scope of the destruction. What had once been a thriving agricultural center was now a twisted landscape of shattered biodomes and crystal formations that definitely hadn't been there before. The crystals appeared after the attack, Veltar noted, following Marcus's gaze. They seemed to be some kind of byproduct of the Devourer's presence. Marcus had his pilot set down near the largest crystal formation. As he stepped out of the craft, he immediately noticed something the Korvathi had failed to mention in their reports. The crystals were resonating with a low, almost subsonic frequency. When he placed his hand against one, he could feel vibrations that seemed to match his own heartbeat. "Has anyone tried to analyze these crystals?" he asked. "Of course," Nixall replied. "They appear to be composed of the same material as the Devourer's armor plating. Our scientists believe they are shed scales or perhaps some form of territorial marking." Marcus pulled out his bioscanner and began taking readings. The crystals weren't just made of the same material as the creature's armor. They were actively connected to it somehow. Energy patterns flowed through them in complex waves, and the frequency of the vibrations shifted subtly as his own emotional state changed. "Tell me," Marcus said, still studying the readings, "when your people feel strong emotions, happiness, sadness, fear, do you notice any physical symptoms? Changes in bioelectricity, perhaps?" Veltar's skin flickered with confusion. "Our empathic abilities do involve bioelectric fields, yes. Why do you ask?" "Just a theory." Marcus moved to examine the damage patterns around the crystal formations. The destruction wasn't random. It formed specific patterns that reminded him of something he'd seen before in his xenobiology studies. "Has anyone ever tried to communicate with the Devourer?" The Korvathi delegation exchanged shocked glances. Communicate with it? Veltar asked. Human Chen, the Devourer, is a mindless beast. It knows only hunger and destruction. That's what everyone assumed about the Zarathi war machine too, Marcus pointed out, until someone actually tried talking to it. As they continued the survey of the attack site, Marcus's suspicions grew stronger. The damage patterns, the crystal formations, even the way the creature moved according to the recorded data, it all suggested something far more sophisticated than a simple predator. That evening, in the safety of the capital city, Marcus reviewed all the historical data again. The timing of the attacks, the creature's apparent intelligence, and most importantly, the correlation between the intensity of Korvathi emotional broadcasting and the frequency of attacks. I need to speak with your historians, he announced to Veltar. Specifically, I want to know about your planet's history before the first Devourer attack. The next morning, Marcus found himself in the vast archives beneath the capital. Ancient Korvathi records, some dating back over 1,000 years, filled crystalline storage matrices that hummed with preserved data. What exactly are you looking for? Asked Keeper Zinda, the elderly Korvathi in charge of the archives. Any mention of large creatures? Unusual seismic activity, or unexplained phenomena from before the first Devourer attack, Marcus replied. It took hours of searching, but eventually they found what Marcus was looking for. Buried in geological surveys from 4 centuries ago were references to deep thermal signatures and massive bio readings in the same cavern systems where the Devourer now emerged. These readings, Marcus said, studying the data, they show a creature of similar size to your Devourer, but the behavior patterns are completely different. This creature seems to have been dormant, hibernating. It was sleeping, Keeper Zinda mused, until we woke it up. Not just woke it up, Marcus corrected. Drove it mad. He pulled up the correlation data he'd been working on. Look at this. Your species evolved empathic abilities as a survival mechanism. In small groups, it helped with cooperation and social bonding. But as your population grew and your technology advanced, you began broadcasting emotions on a planetary scale. The implications began to dawn on the Korvathi present. You think the Devourer is empathic too? Veltar asked. I think the Devourer is being bombarded by the emotional output of an entire civilization, Marcus explained. Imagine being the most sensitive person you know, then having the feelings of billions of people forced into your mind constantly. You'd go insane too. But why does it attack our happiest places? Scholar Nixal asked. If it's being overwhelmed by our emotions, wouldn't it avoid them? Marcus smiled grimly. Because it's not trying to feed on you. It's trying to make the noise stop. Your positive emotions are the loudest and most intense. When your people are happy, they broadcast that happiness across continents. The creature is attacking the sources of the strongest emotional signals. The crystal formations, Keeper Zinda said suddenly. They appear after attacks, exactly. They're not shed scales or territorial markings. They're dampeners. The creature is trying to create interference patterns to block your emotional broadcasts. It's not a monster. It's a being in constant agony, desperately trying to find some peace. The room fell silent as the Korvathi processed this information. Their skin colors shifted through a spectrum of emotions. Shock, guilt, horror, and finally determination. If you're right, Veltar said slowly, then we've been torturing an innocent creature for over 3 centuries. The question now, Marcus said, is what we're going to do about it. He looked around at the assembled Korvathi, seeing the weight of realization settling on them. They had come to him asking for a killer, but what they really needed was a healer. I'm going down into those caverns, Marcus announced, and I'm going to try to help your Devourer find some peace. The descent into the cavern system took Marcus deeper underground than any Korvathi had ever ventured. The bioluminescent guidelights that the expedition team had installed flickered and died one by one as they progressed, leaving only the harsh glare of Marcus's human-made equipment to pierce the darkness. The interference is getting stronger, reported Dr. Kyle Wynn, the Korvathi scientist who had insisted on accompanying Marcus, despite his preference for working alone. Our communication systems are barely functional. Marcus checked his readings. The bioelectric fields down here were unlike anything he'd ever encountered. Waves of energy pulsed through the rock itself, creating patterns that seemed almost like a heartbeat. It's not interference, he corrected. It's harmonics. The creature is trying to create a resonance pattern that cancels out your emotional broadcasts. They had been descending for 6 hours, following the tunnel system that led to the deepest recorded devourer emergence point. The air grew thicker as they went deeper, charged with an energy that made Marcus's skin tingle. His human physiology seemed less affected by the fields than Dr. Kylewin, whose normally pale blue skin had taken on a sickly gray hue. Perhaps we should turn back, the Korvathi suggested. The readings indicate we're approaching dangerous levels of bioelectric saturation. That's exactly where we need to be, Marcus replied, continuing forward. His theory required him to reach the creature's lair, the place where it retreated to find whatever peace it could manage between its tortured emergences. The tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber, and Marcus's breath caught in his throat. The cavern stretched beyond the reach of his lights, but what he could see was beautiful and terrible. Crystalline formations covered every surface, glowing with their own internal light and humming with complex harmonic frequencies. The patterns were incredibly intricate, like frozen music made visible. "My God," Marcus whispered. "It's not just trying to block your signals. It's trying to understand them." The crystal formations weren't random noise generators. They were attempted translations, the creature's desperate efforts to make sense of the emotional chaos that had been forced into its mind for centuries. Marcus could see patterns that corresponded to Korvathi emotional frequencies, but twisted and transformed into something alien, yet beautiful. "Dr. Chen," Kylewin called from behind him. "The readings are off the charts. We need to leave immediately." But Marcus was already moving deeper into the chamber, following the strongest bioelectric signatures. His equipment guided him through a maze of crystal formations toward the chamber's heart, where the energy readings peaked, and there it was. The devourer lay curled in the center of the chamber like a sleeping mountain. Up close, Marcus could see that what the Korvathi had mistaken for armor plating were actually crystalline growths, similar to those covering the chamber walls. The creature had been trying to create its own isolation suit, a barrier against the constant emotional noise. But it wasn't working well enough. Even in sleep, the creature's massive form trembled with distress. Waves of anguish rolled off it in visible bioelectric distortions that made the air shimmer. "It's dreaming," Marcus realized, "and the dreams are nightmares." Dr. Kylewin had caught up with him, and the Korvathi's skin was now flickering rapidly between colors of fear, amazement, and something approaching sympathy. "It's so large, how could something so massive be suffering?" "Size doesn't make pain any less real," Marcus replied. He began setting up his equipment, specialized bioresonance generators that he'd originally designed for calming frightened animals. "I need you to do something for me, Dr. Kylewin. I need you to try to suppress your emotional output as much as possible. I don't understand. Your species broadcasts emotions constantly. Even your fear and amazement right now are probably causing this creature additional distress. Try to think calm, neutral thoughts." As Kylewin struggled to control his emotional emanations, Marcus calibrated his equipment. The bioresonance generators were designed to create soothing frequency patterns, but he needed to adapt them to work with the creature's unique physiology. The first gentle pulse from his equipment caused an immediate response. The devourer's trembling decreased slightly, and the painful distortions in its bioelectric field began to smooth out. Marcus fine-tuned the frequency, watching for optimal resonance. "It's working," Kylewin whispered in amazement. "The creature is calming." Marcus nodded, but he knew this was only a temporary measure. The real solution would require something much more complex. "We need to get your people to understand what they've been doing to this being, and we need to find a way to give it permanent relief." As if sensing their presence, the devourer began to stir. Marcus quickly adjusted his equipment output, trying to maintain the calming frequencies. The creature's massive head lifted, and for the first time, Marcus saw its eyes. They were intelligent, painfully obviously intelligent, and filled with a sadness so profound that Marcus felt his own heart clench in sympathy. "Hello," Marcus said softly, knowing the creature probably couldn't understand his words, but hoping his tone would convey peaceful intent. "I know you're hurting. I'm here to help." The devourer regarded him with those ancient, tormented eyes. Then slowly, carefully, it began to move. Not in attack, but in what Marcus recognized as an attempt at communication. The creature's crystalline growths began to resonate in response to Marcus's biogenerators, creating new harmonic patterns. Marcus watched his instruments in fascination as the creature essentially tried to speak to him using bioelectric frequencies. "Kylewin, are you recording this?" "Yes, but I don't understand what we're seeing." Marcus was beginning to understand, though. The creature was showing him something. A memory, perhaps, or a message encoded in bioelectric patterns. The frequencies shifted and changed, painting a picture of pain and isolation that had lasted for centuries. But there was something else in the pattern. Hope. The creature had detected something different about Marcus, something that didn't hurt the way Korvathi emotions did. Human bioelectric fields operate on different frequencies, Marcus realized. I'm not causing it additional pain because my emotional patterns are alien to its sensory systems. The communication attempt continued for nearly an hour, with Marcus gradually learning to interpret the creature's bioelectric language. By the time it ended, he had a much clearer understanding of what they were dealing with. The devourer wasn't just empathically sensitive, it was the last survivor of its species, trapped underground by a planetary catastrophe that had occurred millennia ago. It had been hibernating, waiting for the surface to become habitable again, when the Korvathi evolution had begun bombarding it with emotional noise. "We have to go back," Marcus said finally. "I need to explain to your people what we've learned." As they prepared to leave, the devourer made one final communication attempt. The bioelectric pattern was simple but clear: gratitude. For the first time in centuries, someone had tried to understand rather than destroy. "We'll be back," Marcus promised. "And next time, we'll have a real solution." The ascent to the surface felt like emerging from a different world. Marcus's mind was already working on the complex problem of how to provide permanent relief for the creature without disrupting Korvathi civilization. It would require the cooperation of an entire species and technology that had never been attempted before. But humans had a reputation for solving impossible problems. It was time to live up to that reputation. The emergency session of the Korvathi High Council was unlike anything in their recorded history. Representatives from every continent had gathered in the capital's great assembly chamber, their skin colors shifting through an unprecedented spectrum of emotions as Marcus presented his findings. "You're asking us to believe that our most feared enemy is actually a victim," Council Leader Morden stated, her skin flickering between skeptical yellow and concerned purple. "That we've been torturing an innocent being for over 3 centuries. "Not just innocent," Marcus corrected, displaying the bioelectric recordings from his encounter. "Ancient, possibly the last of its kind, and far more intelligent than anyone realized." The assembled Korvathi watched in stunned silence as Marcus played the creature's attempted communications. Even translated through his equipment, the patterns of pain and loneliness were unmistakable. "The creature calls itself something that roughly translates to deep singer," Marcus explained. "Its species communicated through bioelectric harmonies, much like your empathic abilities but far more sophisticated. They were the original inhabitants of this planet." Dr. Kilwin, who had returned with Marcus from the deep caverns, stood to address the council. "I witnessed the communication myself. The creature showed no aggression toward human Chen. In fact, it seemed grateful for his presence." "But the attacks," protested General Vexmore, the military leader whose forces had suffered devastating losses to the devourer. "The destruction, the deaths of our people." "Think about it from the creature's perspective," Marcus said. "Imagine you're trying to sleep, and someone is playing music at maximum volume directly into your brain. Now imagine that music never stops, gets louder every year, and is completely alien to anything you've ever experienced. Eventually, you'd do anything to make it stop." Scholar Nixall had been reviewing the historical data Marcus had compiled. "The correlation is undeniable," she announced. "Every major attack corresponds with periods of heightened emotional broadcasting. The creature isn't hunting us, it's having emotional breakdowns." The council chamber erupted in discussion, hundreds of Korvathi voices creating a cacophony of debate. Their skin colors shifted like a living aurora as they processed the implications of Marcus's discovery. "What do you propose we do?" Council Leader Morden asked when order was finally restored. "We cannot simply turn off our empathic abilities. They are fundamental to who we are as a species." Marcus had been expecting this question. "I have a proposal, but it will require unprecedented cooperation and resources. We need to build a bioelectric isolation chamber around the creature's habitat, essentially a Faraday cage designed for emotional frequencies. The technical challenges would be enormous, objected Chief Engineer Dalros. The power requirements alone would be staggering. Not necessarily, Marcus replied, pulling up his preliminary designs. The creature has already done most of the work for us. Those crystal formations it's been creating aren't just random. They're a partially successful isolation system. We just need to complete and optimize what it started. The debates continued for hours. Some council members argued for maintaining the status quo, suggesting they could simply avoid the areas where the creature emerged. Others supported Marcus's plan but worried about the massive resource commitment required. Finally, an unexpected voice entered the discussion. Keeper Zinda, the elderly archivist, requested permission to speak. I have spent my life studying our history, the old Korvathi said, her skin a steady, dignified blue. I have read accounts of every devourer attack, every life lost, every family destroyed. But I have also studied the records of who we were before the attacks began. She paused, looking around the chamber. We were explorers, innovators, beings who solved problems rather than simply enduring them. The creature Human Chen calls Deep Singer was here first. This was its world long before it was ours. If we are to call ourselves civilized, we must find a way to coexist. The chamber fell silent. Keeper Zinda's words carried the weight of centuries of accumulated wisdom. I support Human Chen's proposal, she continued, not just because it may end the attacks, but because it is the right thing to do. One by one, other council members began to voice their support. The tide was turning, but Marcus knew the real challenge lay ahead. If we're going to do this, he said, we need to start immediately. The creature's condition is deteriorating. The bioelectric interference from your growing population is getting stronger, and its isolation attempts are becoming less effective. Over the following weeks, the largest engineering project in Korvathi history began to take shape. Teams of scientists and engineers worked around the clock to understand the creature's crystal formations and develop ways to enhance their isolation properties. Marcus found himself at the center of a scientific revolution. Human approaches to problem solving, combined with Korvathi emotional sensitivity and technical expertise, produced solutions neither species could have achieved alone. The beautiful thing about your people, Marcus told Dr. Kylewin during one of their planning sessions, is that once you understand something emotionally, you commit to it completely. Humans might have the initial insight, but Korvathi have the empathy to see it through. The project faced numerous setbacks. The first attempts to enhance the crystal formations resulted in catastrophic resonance failures that nearly triggered another emergence. The creature's bioelectric patterns were far more complex than initially estimated, requiring entirely new mathematical models to predict and control. But gradually, progress was made. Human engineering principles adapted to work with Korvathi biotechnology created hybrid solutions that neither species had imagined possible. We're ready for the first full-scale test, Chief Engineer Dalros announced after 2 months of intensive work. The isolation field generators are in place, and we've successfully replicated the creature's crystal harmonics in the laboratory. Marcus reviewed the final preparations from the project's command center, built at a safe distance from the cavern system. If this worked, it would be the first time in over 3 centuries that Deep Singer would experience true silence. Remember, Marcus addressed the team, this isn't just about stopping the attacks. We're trying to give a tortured being some peace. If we succeed, we might be able to establish real communication with one of this planet's original inhabitants. As the final countdown began, Marcus found himself thinking about the creature's ancient eyes and the pain he'd seen there. Somewhere deep beneath the planet's surface, Deep Singer was waiting, probably unaware that help was finally coming. Activating isolation field in 3, 2, 1, now. The change in the cavern's bioelectric readings was immediate and dramatic. The chaotic interference patterns that had plagued the creature for centuries began to smooth into ordered harmonics. For the first time in over 300 years, Deep Singer experienced silence, and in that silence something extraordinary began to happen. The silence lasted for 3 days. Marcus monitored the bioelectric readings from the command center, watching as the chaotic patterns that had tortured Deep Singer for centuries gradually settled into something resembling peace. The creature's massive form, visible through deep scanning equipment, had finally stopped its constant trembling. "It's working," Dr. Kyle Wynn reported, his skin glowing with cautious optimism. "The creature's stress indicators are at the lowest levels we've ever recorded." But Marcus wasn't celebrating yet. He knew this was only the first phase of what he hoped would become a much more complex relationship between species. The isolation field had given Deep Singer respite from the emotional bombardment, but it had also cut off any possibility of communication. "We need to establish controlled contact," Marcus announced to the assembled team. "The creature has been isolated for 3 days. It's probably wondering what happened to the noise." Chief Engineer Dalros looked concerned. "If we open the isolation field, won't we just return to the original problem?" "Not if we do it carefully," Marcus explained. "We're going to create a controlled opening, a small window in the field that allows limited emotional transmission. Think of it as building a translator between two completely different forms of consciousness." The technical challenges were immense. Marcus worked with the Corvathi engineering teams to develop what they called an emotional airlock, a system that could filter and moderate the bioelectric transmissions between Deep Singer and the Corvathi population above. "The key is gradual introduction," Marcus explained during one of their planning sessions. "We expose the creature to very small amounts of carefully controlled emotional input, starting with the most peaceful and positive frequencies we can generate." The first test was scheduled for the following week. Marcus would descend into the caverns again, but this time with a portable version of the isolation field generator. The plan was to create a small bubble of controlled space where he could attempt direct communication with Deep Singer. "I still think this is too dangerous," Ambassador Veltar protested. "The creature may have been driven mad by centuries of torture. Even with peaceful intentions, it could be unpredictable." "That's a risk I'm willing to take," Marcus replied. "Besides, humans have a long history of befriending dangerous things. We turned wolves into dogs, remember?" The descent into the caverns felt different this time. The isolation field had changed the very nature of the underground space. The chaotic energy patterns that had made Marcus's skin crawl during his first visit were gone, replaced by a deep, almost meditative calm. When Marcus reached the main chamber, he found Deep Singer in the center of its crystal garden. But the creature was different now. The tortured trembling had stopped, and the crystalline growths on its body were glowing with new patterns. Complex, beautiful geometries that reminded Marcus of mathematical equations made visible. "Hello again," Marcus said softly, setting up his portable equipment. "I told you we'd be back." Deep Singer's massive head turned toward him, and Marcus saw something in those ancient eyes that hadn't been there before: curiosity instead of pain. Marcus activated his controlled communication system, creating a small opening in the isolation field. Immediately, Deep Singer responded, its bioelectric output shifting to match the frequency of Marcus's equipment. But this time, the communication was different. Instead of the desperate, painful patterns Marcus had witnessed before, Deep Singer's signals were organized, purposeful. The creature was actually trying to teach him its language. Over the next several hours, Marcus found himself in the most extraordinary conversation of his life. Deep Singer shared fragments of its species history, images of a world where bioelectric beings communicated through living crystal networks that spanned continents. "Your people," Marcus said, trying to convey the concept through bioelectric patterns. "What happened to them?" The response was a flood of images and emotions that nearly overwhelmed Marcus's translation equipment. He saw a great catastrophe. Not a natural disaster, but something artificial. A weapon of some kind that had disrupted the planetary bioelectric network, killing most of Deep Singer's species instantly and driving the survivors deep underground. "You've been alone all this time," Marcus realized. "The last of your kind." Deep Singer's response was complex, mixing sadness with something that might have been hope. The creature showed Marcus images of the Corvathi evolution, how it had watched from the depths as a new form of bioelectric life had developed on the surface. At first, Deep Singer had been excited. Here was potential companionship, beings who might understand its form of communication. But as the Corvathi population grew and their emotional broadcasts became stronger, what should have been communication became noise, and noise became torture. "But now," Marcus said, understanding flooding through him, "now we can build a bridge." The idea that emerged from their conversation was ambitious beyond anything Marcus had initially envisioned. Instead of simply isolating Deep Singer from Korvathi emotional broadcasts, they could create a translation system that would allow actual communication between the species. Think about it, Marcus explained to the assembled Korvathi leadership when he returned to the surface. Deep Singer's species had millions of years to develop bioelectric communication. They could teach your people techniques and concepts that would advance your empathic abilities beyond anything you've imagined. Scholar Nixall was fascinated by the possibilities. A living library of bioelectric knowledge. The creature could help us understand the deeper mysteries of consciousness and emotion. But the proposal also raised new concerns. What if the creature harbors resentment for the centuries of torture? General Vexmore asked. What if it decides to seek revenge? Then we'll deal with that when it happens, Marcus replied. But from what I've seen, Deep Singer isn't interested in revenge. It's interested in connection. It's been alone for longer than your entire civilization has existed. The debate that followed was intense. Some Korvathi feared that opening communication with Deep Singer would give the creature too much influence over their society. Others worried about the technical challenges of building a planet-wide translation network. But gradually, the vision began to take shape. A hybrid system that would combine Korvathi emotional sensitivity with Deep Singer's ancient bioelectric wisdom, creating something entirely new. A form of interspecies consciousness sharing that neither race could achieve alone. We're not just talking about ending the attacks, Council Leader Mordoon realized. We're talking about the next stage of evolution for both species. Marcus nodded. Deep Singer has knowledge that spans geological ages. Your people have the empathy and technical skills to help it share that knowledge. Together, you could create something unprecedented in galactic history. The project that emerged from these discussions would take years to complete, but its implications were staggering. For the first time, two completely different forms of bioelectric consciousness would attempt to merge their abilities. There's just one thing, Marcus added as the planning sessions concluded. Deep Singer has one specific request. It wants to meet other members of your species face to face. It's been watching you from below for centuries. Now it wants to actually get to know you. The idea of the Devourer, Deep Singer, actually meeting Korvathi citizens was initially terrifying to many, but as Marcus had learned, fear often disappeared when replaced with understanding. Start small, he suggested. Volunteers only. People who understand what we're trying to accomplish. Within days, Marcus was surprised to discover that volunteers weren't hard to find. Keeper Zinda was among the first to request a meeting with Deep Singer, followed by Dr. Kyle Wynn and even some of the council members. The age of fear was ending. The age of friendship was about to begin. The first meeting between Deep Singer and a Korvathi delegation was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Marcus had spent weeks preparing both sides for the encounter, but nothing could have prepared him for the emotional intensity of the moment, when Keeper Zinda first stood before the creature that had terrorized her people for centuries. The modified cavern chamber had been transformed into a meeting space. Controlled lighting systems cast gentle patterns across the crystal formations, while the new translation network hummed quietly in the background. The isolation field had been carefully adjusted to allow limited emotional exchange without overwhelming Deep Singer's sensitive consciousness. Remember, Marcus instructed the 5-member Korvathi delegation. Deep Singer experiences your emotions as physical sensations. Try to maintain calm, positive thoughts. Keeper Zinda stepped forward first, her ancient form dwarfed by Deep Singer's massive presence. Her skin had settled into a steady, respectful blue, the Korvathi equivalent of a formal bow. Deep Singer regarded her with those intelligent eyes, then slowly began to lower its great head until it was closer to her level. The translation system activated, converting the creature's bioelectric patterns into frequencies the Korvathi could understand. The first exchange was simple, greeting and acknowledgement. But as the minutes passed, the communication grew more complex. Deep Singer shared memories of watching Korvathi civilization develop from the depths, of feeling joy at their achievements and pain at their suffering. It says it has been dreaming about us, Dr. Kylewin translated, his voice filled with wonder. All these centuries it has been trying to understand us through the emotional echoes it received. But the most remarkable moment came when Keeper Zinda asked about Deep Singer's own people. The creature's response was a flood of images and emotions that painted a picture of a civilization based entirely on shared consciousness. Individual beings but connected through bioelectric networks that allowed them to experience existence as both one and many simultaneously. "Your species achieved true unity," Zinda said, her skin shifting to colors of amazement. Not just cooperation, but actual shared consciousness. Deep Singer's confirmation carried notes of both pride and profound sadness. Its people had been working toward something they called the Great Harmony, a planetary consciousness that would have connected all life on the world into a single, vast, empathic network. The weapon that destroyed them, Marcus realized. It didn't just kill Deep Singer's people. It destroyed their life's work, their greatest achievement. Over the following days, more Korvathi made the journey to meet Deep Singer. Each encounter brought new revelations about both species. The creature shared advanced bioelectric techniques that immediately enhanced Korvathi empathic abilities, while the Korvathi provided Deep Singer with its first real social interaction in millennia. But the most significant breakthrough came when scholar Nixall proposed an ambitious experiment. "What if we could recreate the Great Harmony?" she suggested during one of the research sessions. Not as Deep Singer's species envisioned it, but as a collaboration between our people and Deep Singer, a hybrid consciousness network. Marcus was intrigued but cautious. The technical challenges would be enormous, and we'd be dealing with the merger of two completely different forms of consciousness. "But think of the possibilities," Dr. Keelwin added. "Deep Singer's species spent millions of years developing bioelectric communication. Combined with our empathic evolution and current technology, we could create something unprecedented." Deep Singer itself was intensely interested in the proposal. When the idea was presented, the creature's excitement was so strong that it momentarily overwhelmed the translation system, filling the chamber with cascading patterns of light and sound. "It wants to try," Marcus interpreted, "but it's also afraid. The last time its species attempted something like this, it resulted in catastrophe." The project that emerged from these discussions was the most ambitious undertaking in Korvathi history. Teams of scientists, engineers, and empaths worked alongside Deep Singer to design a network that would connect Korvathi consciousness with the ancient creature's bioelectric awareness. "We're not trying to create a hive mind," Marcus explained to the High Council during one of his progress reports. "We're building a translation layer that allows voluntary consciousness sharing. Individuals remain distinct, but they can choose to share experiences and knowledge directly." The first tests were conducted with volunteers in controlled laboratory settings. Dr. Keelwin was among the first to experience direct consciousness connection with Deep Singer, an event that left him speechless for hours afterward. "It's indescribable," he finally managed to explain. "I could feel the weight of geological time, the patience of stones, the slow breath of the planet itself. And underneath it all, such profound loneliness and hope." As the network expanded, connecting more Korvathi to Deep Singer's consciousness, something unexpected began to happen. The shared experiences didn't just allow communication, they began healing emotional wounds that had existed for centuries. Korvathi who had lost family members in devourer attacks found themselves experiencing Deep Singer's memories of those events from the creature's perspective. They felt its anguish, its desperate attempts to stop the pain without understanding its source, its horror at the destruction it caused. Similarly, Deep Singer experienced Korvathi emotions with new clarity. The creature finally understood that the emotional broadcasts that had tortured it weren't attacks, but expressions of joy, love, and life. The very things its own species had valued most. "Forgiveness," Keeper Zinda said after her first full consciousness sharing session, "on both sides. Deep Singer forgives us for our ignorance and we forgive it for the pain it caused." But the network offered more than just healing. Deep Singer's vast knowledge, accumulated over millions of years, began to flow into Korvathi consciousness. Medical techniques, engineering principles, and scientific insights that had taken Deep Singer's species eons to develop were suddenly available to the Korvathi. In return, Deep Singer experienced something it had never known: the warmth of family connections, the excitement of discovery, the satisfaction of collaboration. The Korvathi gift for empathy gave the ancient being access to emotional experiences its solitary species had never developed. We're not just sharing knowledge, Marcus observed. We're creating entirely new forms of consciousness. Deep Singer is learning to be social, and the Korvathi are learning to think on geological timescales. The transformation was visible throughout Korvathi society. Cities began incorporating bioelectric principles into their architecture. Scientists made breakthrough discoveries by applying million-year perspectives to contemporary problems. Artists created works that expressed emotions across multiple levels of consciousness simultaneously. But perhaps the most significant change was in how the Korvathi understood themselves. No longer just an empathic species, they were becoming something new, a hybrid form of consciousness that combined the best aspects of both species. Deep Singer isn't just our friend now, Ambassador Veltar observed during one of the progress meetings. It's becoming part of who we are as a people. Marcus watched the transformation with a mixture of pride and amazement. What had started as a simple request to kill a monster had become the foundation for an entirely new form of civilization. But he also knew that the real test was yet to come. Other species across the galaxy were beginning to take notice of what was happening on the Korvathi homeworld. The implications of successful consciousness merger between species were profound and potentially threatening to established galactic power structures. We've accomplished something remarkable here, Marcus told Deep Singer during one of their private conversations. But now we need to figure out how to share it with the rest of the galaxy without causing a panic. Deep Singer's response carried notes of ancient wisdom and new hope. The creature had learned patience through millions of years of solitude. It was willing to wait as long as necessary for the galaxy to be ready for what they had created together. The age of isolation was ending. The age of unity was about to begin. 2 years after first contact with Deep Singer, the Korvathi homeworld had become the most studied planet in the galaxy. Representatives from dozens of species arrived weekly to witness what many were calling the consciousness revolution, the hybrid civilization that had emerged from the merger of Korvathi empathy and Deep Singer's ancient wisdom was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Marcus stood in the observation deck of the new Interspecies Research Center, watching as a delegation of Zarathi scientists conducted their third month of studies. Through the vast windows, he could see the transformed landscape where Korvathi cities now incorporated Deep Singer's bioelectric architecture, creating living buildings that responded to the emotional needs of their inhabitants. The Galactic Council wants to establish a permanent research station here, Ambassador Veltar informed him, her skin colors now displaying the complex patterns that had evolved from regular consciousness sharing with Deep Singer. They're calling it the most significant scientific development in 1,000 years. Marcus smiled. What does Deep Singer think about becoming a galactic celebrity? It finds the attention amusing, Dr. Kylewin replied, joining the conversation. His own empathic abilities had grown exponentially through the consciousness network, allowing him to serve as one of the primary interpreters between Deep Singer and visiting species. It says that after millions of years of solitude, having too many visitors is a pleasant problem to have. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. The early stages of consciousness merger had produced some unexpected effects. Several Korvathi had experienced what Marcus termed temporal displacement anxiety, the disorienting experience of thinking on geological timescales while living in biological time. Others had struggled with the vast scope of Deep Singer's memories, finding themselves overwhelmed by millions of years of accumulated experience. But gradually, both species had learned to adapt. The Korvathi developed techniques for compartmentalizing Deep Singer's vast consciousness, accessing specific knowledge without being overwhelmed by the totality of its experience. Deep Singer, in turn, learned to modulate its communications to match the emotional and intellectual capacity of its Korvathi partners. The latest test results are remarkable, Scholar Nixal announced, approaching with a datapad full of readings. The hybrid consciousness network is now stable enough to support thousands of simultaneous connections. We're approaching true planetary unity. Marcus reviewed the data with satisfaction. What they had achieved went far beyond his original goal of simply ending the Devourer attacks. The Korvathi and Deep Singer had created a new form of civilization, one based on voluntary consciousness sharing that preserved individual identity while enabling unprecedented cooperation and knowledge exchange. The Threxian Empire is requesting a formal audience, Veltar continued. They want to understand how consciousness merger might be applied to resolve the civil wars on their border, worlds, and the Andromedans want to know if the technique could be used to communicate with the energy beings in the Spiral Nebula, Kilwyn added. Marcus wasn't surprised by the galactic interest. The implications of successful interspecies consciousness merger were staggering. If the techniques developed here could be adapted to other species combinations, it might be possible to resolve conflicts that had persisted for millennia. But he was also aware of the potential dangers. Not every species would approach consciousness merger with the Korvathi's natural empathy and Deep Singer's hard-won wisdom. We need to be careful about how we share this technology, Marcus warned. In the wrong hands, consciousness merger could become a tool for domination rather than cooperation. Deep Singer had expressed similar concerns. Through the network, the ancient being had shared memories of its species' attempts to communicate with other life forms on their homeworld. Not all of those attempts had ended peacefully. Perhaps that's why humans were necessary for this breakthrough, Keeper Zinda observed, joining their discussion. Her consciousness integration with Deep Singer was so complete that she sometimes seemed to speak with the voice of geological time itself. Your species has a unique talent for building bridges between different forms of life. Marcus considered this. Humans did seem to have an unusual ability to befriend dangerous or alien entities. From wolves to artificial intelligences, humanity had a track record of turning potential enemies into partners. It might be more than just talent, he mused. Humans exist in a kind of middle ground between pure logic and pure emotion. We can understand both without being dominated by either. That might make us natural mediators for consciousness merger between very different species. This observation had led to a new role for Marcus and other humans in the expanding consciousness network. As more species requested access to the merger technology, humans increasingly found themselves serving as facilitators and translators between radically different forms of consciousness. The Crystalline Collective arrives next week, Veltar informed him. They're silicon-based entities whose consciousness operates on quantum frequencies. Deep Singer believes they might be descendants of a species it encountered millions of years ago. Marcus felt a familiar excitement at the prospect of new challenges. Each new species brought unique perspectives and abilities to the growing network. The Andromedans had contributed their mastery of energy manipulation. The Zerathi had shared their expertise in artificial consciousness. Even the warlike Threxians had offered insights into warrior psychology that had helped resolve several minor conflicts. What started as a simple pest control problem has become the foundation for a new galactic civilization, Marcus reflected. The success of the consciousness network had also brought unexpected personal rewards. Marcus found his own awareness expanding through regular contact with Deep Singer and the hybrid network. He could now perceive emotional currents that had been invisible to him before, and his understanding of xenopsychology had advanced beyond anything he had thought possible. But perhaps the greatest satisfaction came from watching Deep Singer's transformation. The ancient being that had once been driven to destructive madness by isolation was now the central node of an interspecies consciousness network that spanned star systems. Its loneliness had been replaced by connection, its pain by purpose. Deep Singer wants to show you something, Dr. Kelwyn announced, gesturing toward the communication chamber that had been built adjacent to the research center. Marcus made his way to the chamber, where the consciousness interface awaited. As he activated the connection, Deep Singer's presence filled his awareness with its familiar blend of ancient wisdom and newfound joy. The images that flowed through the link were unlike anything Deep Singer had shared before. They showed the network as the ancient being perceived it, not just as connected minds, but as a living tapestry of consciousness that was growing and evolving with each new connection. You see it too, Marcus said, understanding the significance of what Deep Singer was showing him. The network isn't just connecting existing consciousnesses, it's creating something entirely new. Deep Singer's confirmation carried with it a sense of profound anticipation. The ancient being had lived through the rise and fall of its own species' attempt at planetary consciousness. Now it was witnessing the birth of something even more ambitious, a galactic consciousness that preserved the uniqueness of individual species while enabling unprecedented cooperation and understanding. This is just the beginning, Marcus realized. We're not just solving conflicts or sharing knowledge. We're evolving into something the galaxy has never seen before. As he disconnected from the interface, Marcus looked out at the transformed landscape of the Corvathi homeworld. Cities pulsed with bioelectric rhythms that harmonized with their inhabitants' emotional needs. Forests had been replanted using techniques that created living sensor networks. Even the crystal formations that had once been deep, Singer's desperate attempt at isolation, now served as nodes in a planet-wide consciousness. Webb, it had been 3 years since the Corvathi delegation had first approached him with their simple request to kill a monster. Instead, he had helped them discover that their greatest enemy could become their most valuable ally. And in doing so, he had helped birth a new age for the galaxy itself. The age of the consciousness revolution had begun, and Marcus Chen, a simple xenobiologist who preferred to work alone, found himself at the center of the most significant transformation in galactic history. Sometimes, he reflected, the best solutions came from refusing to solve problems the way everyone expected them to be solved. Sometimes, the best answer to a request to kill a monster was to make friends with it instead.